Hey fellow Star Wars fans, this is Drew Kaplan, Star Wars Maven. If you're like me, you've seen this weekend's new episode of The Mandalorian kicking off the second season. And not only that, you probably also enjoyed it. I thought it was fantastic, better than the stuff we saw in the first season, and I'm really stoked for the second season. We're learning about the Mandalorians, but we'll learn about Boba Fett. And I wanted to focus on this one, talking about Cobb Vanth and Boba Fett's Mandalorian armor. Now, this is not the first time that they have appeared in Star Wars, nor for that matter, we've seen Mos Pelgo before, and I just wanted to focus on talking about these things. The very first time it actually appears is in this book, Star Wars Aftermath, written by Chuck Wendig, in which we see Cobb Vanth coming across in the Jawa Sandcrawler. We see him seeing Boba Fett's Mandalorian armor, which was really intriguing. Is Boba Fett alive or dead? Super duper unclear. His Mandalorian armor is there as we read of, and he acquires it. Now, we also see Cobb Vanth and this Boba Fett Mandalorian armor in the second book of the trilogy, as well as in the final book of the trilogy, Empire's End. Now, you might be asking, when does this take place? All three of these books take place between the battles of Endor and Jakku. So just like we saw in this week's episode of Cobb Vanth talking about the fall of the second Death Star, when the second Death Star was destroyed, and then there was sort of this lawlessness from the mining guilds going on, a very similar motivation happens in these three books, where he emerges as the sheriff of Mos Pelgo, the town that we see in this week's episode. And we also have a little bit of a conflict. And this is, I'm not really sure how it's going to be resolved by the Lucasfilm Story Group. I'm curious because in the very first book, Howie chances upon it in a Jawa Sandcrawler is different than what we see in this week's episode, when he says that he was hungry, he was tired, he was thirsty. He came across the Sandcrawler, and while he was there with his katana of the goods, the Jawa was like, you can have, whatever, and he sees it. It's a very similar experience in Aftermath, where he happens to chance upon this entire armor. Now, what we do read of in the second book is that actually the Jawas were scavenging the Sarlacc pit, and the Sarlacc was still alive, although not to the healthy degree, but the Sarlacc was still alive, and they were scavenging for a lot of things. There was a barge, all these different things, and ultimately he's already a sheriff, really. When he spots the armor, he says, I need this to help bring law to Mos Pelgo. Now, if you think about the broader context, not only has the Empire pulled out from Tatooine, but so has there's also a huge power vacuum with the death of Jabba the Hutt right? It's the same time. So during this time, there's a lot of lawlessness, a lot of power grabbing. And one of the things that we see Cobb Vanth in these three books in this trilogy is dealing with one of these mining guilds, they're basically villains, but they're not good folks. And so he's really trying to keep them out and not involved in Mos Pelgo. One interesting difference, I'm not sure if it's a difference, and this could potentially be resolved. One thing we saw in this week's episode was this hatred, or it's like a non-connection between Cobb Vanth, the citizens of Mos Pelgo, and the Tusken Raiders. They seem to not be fond of each other because the Raiders are Raiders. They raid their town, and it's not a good relationship at all. Whereas in actually what we see in this book, sorry about that, is that they have a working relationship with with the citizens of Mos Pelgo, with the Tusken Raiders, and I don't know how that's going to be resolved, to be honest. That could be kind of interesting. But one thing they do talk about actually in this book, The Empire's End, is that they gave them a Krayt Dragon Pearl. So, which is something that we see in this week's episode of them getting a Krayt Dragon Pearl, though definitely, as we see in this week's episode, take a lot of work. Now, what this means going forward, it'll be interesting. Of course, as we saw at the very end of the episode, Boba Fett still lives. It's been an interesting quandary for years. It's almost like Schrodinger's Boba Fett. Like, does he still live or not? Well, we got confirmation in this week's episode that he does still indeed live, and I'm very excited to see how this continues for the season. So thank you so much for watching, and may the Force be with you.